So I said to him, "Really, dear? Well, I'm sure she will appreciate the thought behind your gift. There are much better ways to let a young man know you are interested in her." And do you know what he said? No, what? Well, he just started prattling off some nonsense that his friends told him about courtship, though of course he didn't use that term. What rubbish, Twilight! It was all I could do not to laugh in his face. I would gladly craft a risque garment for a couple looking to add some spice to their relationship. But can you imagine receiving such a thing on the first date? Stallions, I swear! Stallions. Then, of course, Sweetie Belle asked what a bridle is. How are you supposed to explain something like that to a filly? Well, dear, when a boy pony and a girl pony love each other very much, but decide things are getting a bit boring, sometimes I don't know why I let her in the shop when I'm dealing with a customer. It's never led to a good outcome now that I think about it. Well, just then, and you won't believe this, Twilight, his mare friend walks in the door, I suppose to ask me to make something for her date, and she sees us haggling over this, accoutrement, and you know what she does? She turns around and stomps right back out, and he goes chasing after her, yelling that I was trying to sell it to him. The nerve! That's amazing, Rarity. No, it was tragic, Twilight. I lost 2 sales, though I suppose one of them probably wasn't meant to happen, and the whole mess made me late for my spa appointment. I tell you, if I wasn't ready for a massage this morning, I certainly am now. Anyways, to answer your question, that's what kept me. By this point, Twilight Sparkle had completely forgotten her original question. It took her several seconds to realize that Rarity had finished her monologue and was expecting some sort of coherent response. The white unicorn looked at her from across the steaming tub with an eager expression on her face. She mumbled. Think, Twilight, something about her store and... Late! She was late! Well, I'm just glad you were able to join us, she finished with a smile. Rarity smiled and relaxed back into the tub, sinking until the swirling waters enveloped all but her head. Her rich purple mane floated around her face, forming a fan on top of the water. The two spent long minutes in silence, simply soaking up the penetrating heat of the bath. Twilight was careful not to ask any more questions. Finally, Rarity broke the silence. She glanced over to the third companion, who had yet to say a single word. Is everything all right, Fluttershy? She asked. The butter-yellow Pegasus, hidden beneath the water except for her face and a shock of pink mane, bobbed her head. Twilight and Rarity exchanged a glance. Twilight shrugged. You're enjoying this, right? Rarity asked. She scooted closer to Fluttershy's place along the edge of the bath. Twilight mirrored her movement until the two flanked the Pegasus. Fluttershy nodded again. The movement sent tiny waves rolling across the steaming water. It's just that you've been very quiet today, Rarity said. Even for you, I mean. That finally provoked a response. Fluttershy poked her head above the water, her pink mane hanging straight down like a curtain across her face. She smiled at her friends and spoke up in a voice so quiet Twilight had to strain to hear. Oh, thank you, Rarity. I've been practicing. Let me see if I've got this straight, Twilight Sparkle said. You're practicing being quiet for a game? The three had long since vacated the baths and were now receiving individualized treatments in a dimly lit parlor. Rarity was submerged again, this time in a thick, dark mud that squelched as she moved. A goopy green paste was carefully smeared all over her face, and a pair of thick cucumber slices covered her eyes. Her rich mane was hidden, wrapped in a bath towel large enough to mummify an entire pony. Rarity's tail appeared to be fending for itself beneath the mud. Fluttershy was receiving a much less invasive pampering. She lay prone atop a soft floor mat, her wings stretched out on either side.
Aloe, one of the spa pony sisters, held a tiny applicator brush in her teeth, gently dabbing dips of oil on the shaft of each of the Pegasus feathers. Once she had a dozen or so painted in this fashion, she used a thin wool cloth to brush the oil along Fluttershy's plumes. The resulting golden luster shimmered in the dim room like sunlight on water. Twilight opted for the simplest treatment available at the spa, a massage and a horn filing. Lotus, the other small pony sister, expertly pressed her oiled hooves onto the unicorn's back. Per her usual habit, she mentally named each of the major muscle groups as Lotus worked.
Thoracolumbar fascia. That's good. Do that a few more times. Oh, longissimus dorsi.
Well, it's more of a contest than a game.
Fluttershy answered. She turned her head slightly away to avoid Twilight's gaze.
It's the World Championship, actually.
World Championship of being quiet? Really? You can't be serious.
Fluttershy blushed and tried to cover her snout with her hooves. Fortunately, Rarity came to her rescue.
Oh, leave the poor dear alone, Twilight. We've certainly tolerated some odd things from you this year. Remember the centipedes? That was research,
Twilight shot back. Rarity arched an eyebrow over her cucumber slice.
It was for science. Besides, every pony recovered. Well, this contest sounds like a splendid way for Fluttershy to have some safe fun.
Twilight bristled on her emphasis on the word safe.
No dragons, parasprites, manticores, little sisters. Yes, the more I think about it, the better it seems.
Oh, I'm so glad you think so,
Fluttershy said. She had slowly relaxed as Rarity spoke, no longer hiding behind her hooves.
Especially this year, with all the expectations.
There was a pause. Twilight glanced at Rarity. Fluttershy nodded, not noticing the perplexed expression on the unicorn's face.
Yes, after last year, everyone will be trying to beat me. I almost didn't want to go back, but Rainbow Dash said I have to be a brave pony.
She emphasized this by stomping her hoof so lightly it barely made a sound. She winced at the noise.
Sorry,
she whispered.
So you've done this before?
Twilight asked. Fluttershy bobbed her head, too embarrassed by her outburst to speak just yet.
And you did well?
The Pegasus nodded again.
Yes, I won.
Rarity's horn glowed a light silver. The pair of cucumber slices covering her eyes lifted away, revealing a surprised expression.
Fluttershy, do you mean to say that you're the world champion?
The Pegasus blushed furiously, trying to hide behind her hooves again.
Oh dear, don't be embarrassed. That's wonderful. I can't imagine what it must be like being the best in the world at something. Why didn't you ever tell us this?
Well, I didn't want to boast.
It's not boasting to brag about something like this.
She paused for a moment and tilted her head and thought,
I suppose it is boasting, come to think of it, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Wait, time out, Twilight said. We're talking about the World Championships of being quiet? That's not even a real contest. Well, it's certainly not Ponyville's running of the leaves, Rarity replied. How did you place in that again, Twilight? Do I detect a mite of jealousy? Twilight spluttered. What? I'm not jealous. Any pony can be quiet. It's not even a contest.
Oh, it's harder than that, Twilight. You have to be quiet for a long time.
Twilight rolled her eyes.
Fluttershy, I'm a librarian. I think I know a thing or two about being quiet.
Fluttershy seemed doubtful, but kept her silence.
Well, as a librarian, maybe you should be more supportive. Fluttershy, where is this championship?
Oh, it's in Canterlot. Princess Celestia awards the first place prize.
Rarity oohed in admiration. Twilight gawked, stunned that Celestia would have anything to do with such an event.
Canterlot, that's just perfect! Fluttershy, you simply must let us come with you!
There was a long pause. Fluttershy's eyes grew wide, darting around the room as if she were looking for something.
Oh, well, that would be...
Fluttershy trailed off. Rarity gave Fluttershy her widest, most eager smile.
That would be... great.
She finished.
And Twilight, you must come too,
Rarity purred, suddenly narrowing her eyes. Twilight shook her head slightly, but stopped and smiled as soon as Fluttershy turned to face her.
Oh, would you, Twilight?
She asked.
I hadn't planned on asking any pony, but it would mean so much to me.
I'd be happy to, Fluttershy,
Twilight responded through gritted teeth, though her smile remained as wide as ever.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Rarity.
Rarity smirked.
And we must invite the others,
she said, wiggling beneath the mud.
I just know Pinkie would love to come, and I'm sure Applejack and Rainbow Dash would have fun.
There was a moment of silence. Fluttershy and Twilight exchanged glances. Even Rarity seemed to reconsider the wisdom of her words. Finally, like a dam bursting, the three all spoke at one.
Maybe that's not...
All three stopped. Rarity coughed politely and picked up the pieces of the conversation.
On second thought, maybe they would not enjoy a cultured event like this as much as us. I'm inclined to agree,
Twilight said. She tried to imagine Pinkie Pie attending a being quiet competition. Her prodigious imagination failed her.
It would be terrible,
Fluttershy said. They looked at her in surprise, causing her to duck her head self-consciously.
Well, it would be,
she added quietly. Even Aloe and Lotus, occupied as they were with their pampering, agreed with that.
They rented out the entire convention center?
Rarity asked. Her voice was soft with astonishment. The three stood inside the spacious auditorium of the Canterlot Convention Center. Hundreds of ponies milled about the entrance, grouped in small knots or winding their way through the lengthy registration lines. The crowd was surprisingly silent considering its size. After some consideration, Twilight Sparkle decided that was appropriate for the gathering. A large banner strung across the hall announced, "Welcome, competitors," in tiny block letters that were nearly lost in the huge expanse of the sign. Other posters listed various venues, and a large chart hung on the back wall showed the various brackets, waiting to be filled with the winners' names.
Oh, yes,
Fluttershy said, her voice barely above a whisper.
They tried holding it in the castle last year, but there wasn't enough space.
This is for real?
Twilight said, her eyes wide as she looked around the hall.
All of these ponies are here.
She was suddenly cut off by several nearby ponies who shushed her. She ducked, her head blushing.
They're all here for the Quiet Game Championships?
She finished with a whisper.
Sorry,
she added to the ponies around her. Fluttershy nodded.
There are 2 competitions, actually. One for amateurs and one for, professionals.
The ponies around them didn't shush her, Twilight noticed. In fact, they seemed to regard her with something like awe.
Can anyone compete as an amateur?
Rarity asked, giving the line leading to the nearest registration table a thoughtful look.
Well, there's a small fee, but yes, to compete in the professional rounds, you need to win a local championship.
Local championship?
Twilight tried to remember if there'd been any sort in Ponyville. Again, her mind failed her.
Oh, it looks like Celestia's judging my bracket,
Fluttershy said. She pointed a hoof at the chart behind the wall, where 4 sets of 16 ponies were arranged for competition.
That's supposed to be good luck.
Sure enough, beside the lower left bracket, written in an elegant cursive, was Princess Celestia's name.
Does she do this every year? Why didn't she ever mention it? What other crazy contests does she judge?
Are you alright, Twilight?
Fluttershy said. The question snapped Twilight back to reality.
You were staring at something.
She added.
Sorry, just lost in thought for a moment,
Twilight responded.
Come on, let's get you to your first match.
I'll be right along, girls,
Rarity said.
Save a seat for me, would you, Twilight?
And we are about to begin the first round of competition here at the Quiet Game World Championships.
The announcer, a tan earth pony with a megaphone cutie mark, said into the microphone. The public address system was turned down so low that Twilight could hardly hear her, despite the unnerving silence that packed the auditorium. Hundreds of ponies sat on cushioned seats in rows around her, staring down at the empty stage. She saw quite a few homemade banners with Fluttershy's name on them.
That's right, Chip,
said the co-announcer, a light purple Pegasus. Apparently Fluttershy's match warranted a full broadcast team.
As expected, there is a large crowd in Auditorium A to see our returning championship attempt to defend her crown. For you ponies joining us at home, the excitement here is almost unbearable.
Twilight wouldn't have characterized the crowd in quite that fashion. She'd been in louder cemeteries, at night. For research, of course.
You said it, Ace. The crowd here is almost buzzing with excitement.
Twilight was fairly certain she could hear a pin drop from the stage. Before she could mentally critique the announcers any further, Rarity appeared. She squeezed past the ponies between Twilight and the aisle and took a seat beside her friend.
Did I miss anything?
She whispered. Twilight shook her head.
They're about to get started, I think. Celestia's already waiting for them down front.
Sure enough, a pastel glow bathed the front row of the auditorium.
Where'd you go, anyway?
Oh, well, I figured, as long as we're here, why not have some fun?
Rarity tittered.
So I signed up for the amateur competition. My first round starts right after this.
Twilight was quiet while she considered different responses. Eventually she settled on straightforward.
Are you sure that's a good idea, Rarity? I think they take this very seriously.
Rarity waved her hoof dismissively.
Psh! Twilight, they're all amateurs. No competition for a demure, cultured lady like myself.
Twilight bit the inside of her cheek. Fortunately, she was rescued by the announcers.
Here she comes, Ace,
Chip said.
Fillies and Gentlecoats, your returning champion, Fluttershy!
The crowd murmured as the yellow Pegasus trotted onto the stage from the left. A bright spotlight popped on, highlighting her in a circle of light, her oiled feathers and brushed mane glimmering dazzlingly in the dim auditorium. Twilight had never seen her friend look so beautiful or...
Woohoo!
Rarity screamed from behind her, shattering the quiet room.
Go, Fluttershy! Beat that pony! Show them how to...
She trailed off as every pony in the auditorium turned to glare at her. Fluttershy shook her head sadly from on stage. Twilight attempted to sink down into her seat, mortified. Rarity cleared her throat.
Sorry,
she whispered, a hot blush on her face.
Carry on.
And just a reminder for the audience, please observe the rules regarding excessive celebration or cheering,
Ace said.
We don't want to distract the competitors. That's right, Ace. This isn't a zoo, after all.
I really don't know her,
Twilight whispered to the pony seated next to her. The Pegasus mare turned her nose up with a disdainful harumph.
It looks like our challenger is ready for battle, Chip. She is a fierce competitor who hates not getting her way. Presenting Her Royal Highness, Nightmare Moon.
The crowd stirred uneasily as the second pony strode forward. The auditorium fell darker still as her towering indigo form filled the stage. She loomed over Fluttershy. The tip of her spiraling horn reached above the cowering Pegasus's head. Her wings spread wide in triumph. Her mane flowed like water from her regal form, filled with 1,000 pinpoints of light. She was as cold and beautiful as the moon, and sneered at her opponent with disdain so palpable that even the ponies in the crowd shrank away in fear. A rime of frost grew on the wood stage beneath her hooves.
"Didn't we beat her?"
Rarity whispered. Twilight stared at their nemesis, her mouth slack with shock.
Well, she sure does know how to make an entrance, doesn't she, Ace? She sure does, Chip. However, it takes more than a flashy costume to win at the quiet game. Let's go over the rules for everyone at home while our competitors get ready. Good call, Ace. This round uses the traditional rule set, meaning the competitors may not physically touch each other or use any forms of magic. If neither of the pony has been disqualified by the line of judges at the end of 20 minutes, the head judge will render a verdict based on style and creativity.
What? Style and creativity?
Twilight looked around to see if any pony else was confused as she. Only Rarity seemed equally lost.
The judges are signaling they're ready. This is it, every pony. Time starts now.
Nightmare Moon and Fluttershy stared at each other from across the stage. Agonizingly slowly, the towering alicorn began creeping toward her prey. Fluttershy stood rooted, her legs trembling slightly as the goddess of the night drew nearer. She finally stopped when her horn intruded upon Fluttershy's spotlight, casting a shadow on the mare. Nightmare Moon stared down at the Pegasus, daring her to flinch and look away. Fluttershy gulped inaudibly, but held the greater pony's gaze with her own. Nightmare Moon narrowed her eyes at her foe and bared her long fangs at the shivering Pegasus. More than one pony in the audience fainted at the sight. Fluttershy squeezed her eyes shut and looked like she might collapse as well.
Does that disqualify you?
Twilight thought.
It's easy to be quiet if you're unconscious.
Twilight never got her answer. Fluttershy took several deep breaths and opened her eyes. She slowly came to her hooves and returned the dark princess's stare with the intensity of a cockatrice. Nightmare Moon flinched, her wings flaring in shock.
You go, girl,
Twilight silently cheered. Rarity trembled with excitement next to her. The auditorium held its collective breath. But Nightmare Moon was not so easily overcome. She rose on her back legs, her wings wide as the night. The spotlight dimmed in sympathy. The chill surrounding her nightmare form swelled and filled the room with shivering cold. Twilight's breath puffed in front of her.
This is it. No pony can withstand that.
One could, one did. Fluttershy tilted her snout, spun in place, and sat with her back to the princess. Ignored. Nightmare Moon stood, her godlike presence shattered by the simple act of defiance. Rage replaced her confusion. She slammed the stage with her hooves, shattering the thick wood planks. "How dare you turn your back on me, you fool!" she shouted. "Do you know who I am? I will!" An alarm sounded, cutting her off mid-rant. She stood in open-mouthed shock as the crowd began quietly cheering for Fluttershy. For her part, she turned and gave the princess a slight bow and trotted off stage. Wait! Nightmare Moon said. Her eyes darted around frantically. "That doesn't count! That was practice!" She looked at her sister pleadingly. "Tia, tell them it was just practice!" As she spoke, her form glowed and shrank, eventually revealing the smaller but still regal shape of Princess Luna. Celestia shook her head and rose from her seat. A pair of Pegasus guards kept the adoring crowd at bay as she walked to the exit.
Well, that was fast,
said Chip.
2 minutes and 19 seconds. According to the official clock, one of Fluttershy's better showings. It sure was, Chip. For a moment there, I thought Nightmare Moon might pull it off, but I guess it wasn't meant to be. Hopefully, we'll see her back here next year, though. Stay tuned, ponies. There's more quiet games action after this word from our sponsors.
The crowd filed out quietly, the silence broken by the occasional mumbles of conversation. Fluttershy's name came up frequently. Twilight and Rarity stayed in their seats for a while longer.
Well, that was interesting.
Twilight said.
It was more intense than I expected,
Rarity said.
Do you think it's like that in the amateur league? I don't see how it could be.
Twilight paused for a moment.
Good luck, though.
Her friend gulped.
Yes, well, I'd better get going. Don't want to miss my first victory.
Rarity gave a quiet, hollow laugh.
You're coming too, right?
I'll catch up in a moment. I think Luna needs a friend right now.
Indeed, Luna sat on the stage, her head low in mourning. Twilight gave Rarity a gentle nudge and trotted onto the stage to join Equestria's second princess.
Are you ready?
Fluttershy whispered.
I think so.
Rarity replied. She took a deep, shaky breath.
I'm a bit nervous, though. Is it all right to be nervous? Oh, I'm always nervous. It's just that sometimes when I'm nervous, I start talking to break the tension, no. Do you think that's a problem?
Fluttershy was quiet for a while.
No, that's fine,
she finally offered. Rarity exhaled in relief.
Oh, good. I was worried there for a moment. It would be so humiliating to lose the very first match, and to a fool no less.
Across the room, her competitor, a somber young earth pony colt, listened to some final guidance from his coach. Fluttershy was silent again.
Oh, they're calling for me,
Rarity said.
Wish me luck.
How is she?
Twilight Sparkle whispered as Fluttershy took her seat. The crowd was much lighter for Rarity's match, though Fluttershy's presence had drawn in several more ponies than would normally attend an early amateur round.
She's fine,
Fluttershy temporized.
Do you think she'll win?
Fluttershy pawed at the seat in front of her with her hoof. Twilight decided not to press the issue. There were no announcers for amateur rounds. Instead, a judge, a pink Pegasus, called the two competitors to the center of the room. She spoke with them briefly and then sent them to their respective corners. The colt bounced with nervous energy. Rarity pawed at her mane self-consciously. The room was silent for a moment. Rarity looked around in confusion.
Have we started yet?
Twilight jumped at the unexpected sound of the buzzer. Even Fluttershy seemed shocked by how quickly the round ended.
Wait, that's not fair,
Rarity said. She stomped a hoof defiantly.
I didn't know we started.
The judge walked over to speak with her, while the colt ran to his beaming parents. The crowd began filing out, with most of the ponies mumbling in disappointment.
That was fast,
Twilight observed. Fluttershy nodded.
Anyway, it looks Rarity will be here a while,
she continued. Indeed, Rarity was just getting started. Judging by the excited gestures she used to emphasize her argument, she was still building steam when Fluttershy and Twilight finally snuck out of the room. The next several rounds flew by in quick succession. Twilight Sparkle and a sulking Rarity watched and cheered quietly for their friend as she defeated her next three opponents, emerging as the champion of her bracket, and one of the last four ponies remaining in the competition. The semifinals round was held in the largest auditorium in the convention center, the same room used for the indoor hoofball tournaments. Thousands of ponies crowded the stands, an eerily silent pastel sea staring down at the brightly lit stage. As guests of the returning champion, the two had seats in the VIP sections, just a few rows from the action.
I have to admit, this is more exciting than I thought,
Twilight whispered. Rarity sniffed.
It seems overblown to me,
she mumbled.
It's a silly game. I mean, really. Being quiet, that's not a real contest.
Twilight turned away before rolling her eyes.
Anyway,
she said,
This round should be good. Apparently the other pony is undefeated and only missed last year's competition because he was very ill.
The silence of the crowd gave way to quiet murmurs as Fluttershy walked on stage. She gave a nervous wave to thousands of ponies around her and sank down onto her knees.
Well, it looks like he got better,
Rarity said.
Here he comes now. Ooh, he has an entourage. How cosmopolitan.
The entourage was a quartet of earth ponies wearing medical scrubs. They ascended the steps onto the stage, each holding the handful of a stretcher. They carefully lowered their charge onto the floor and trotted back down the steps. The crowd was utterly silent, and Twilight and Rarity stared at the stage, their eyes wide in horror. A bleach-white unicorn skeleton rested on the stretcher. Its horn had fallen off at some point, leaving the gaping hole in the center of its forehead.
Welcome back, every pony,
Chip said.
We're about to start the semifinals here at the Quiet Game World Championship, and the tension is so thick you can cut it with a knife. Indeed,
said Ace.
Anticipation is particularly high for this round. Those of you who watched last year's competition may remember Shy Sparrow, the favorite to win, had to pull out of the game because of a serious illness. Unfortunately, he did not recover, but in his will he stipulated that he be entered in this year's contest instead. Didn't that cause some controversy, Ace? It sure did, Chip. Celestia herself had to rule on his eligibility. Incidentally, this is why the new rulebook only authorizes living ponies for major tournaments. So, now or never for Sparrow? That's right. But if there's one pony in Equestria who could take him down, it's Fluttershy.
Twilight,
Rarity whispered.
I think I'm going to be sick.
Her white coat looked greener than normal. Twilight didn't respond. In fact, she didn't even hear her friend. Her gaze remained locked on the skeleton in shock.
And the judges are almost ready. As a reminder, this is a combination round, meaning contestants will be judged on not how quiet they are, but how long they can go without moving. Sparrow would seem to have an advantage on both of those counts, Ace. He sure does, Chip. It goes to show that strategy is just as important as talent in this game.
Strategy?
They're about to start the clock. Good luck, both competitors.
The scoreboard above the stage flickered to life. A bright red digital readout filled the screen and began counting down from 1 hour. 59:59, 59:58, 59:57. Fluttershy sat immobile on the stage, her gaze locked on the skeleton only a few feet away. Aside from the nearly imperceptible rise and fall of her chest, she might as well have been a statue.
Just a reminder, folks,
Chip said. The volume on the PA system turned so low, she might as well not have used it.
Competitors will not be marked down for blinking or breathing unless they do it excessively.
A trio of judge ponies sat at a desk beside the stage. They occasionally scribbled something in their notebooks and pointed their hooves at the contestants. Most of their attention seemed to be on Fluttershy.
That's not fair,
Rarity hissed in Twilight's ear.
He's a skeleton! How is any pony supposed to beat him?
The clock counted its remorseless countdown. As the hour passed, the judge remained focused on Fluttershy, pointing grimly at the occasional twitch of her ears, or the drifting of her long mane in the gentle circulating air of the auditorium. Sparrow remained as still and quiet as a tomb.
This isn't good,
Twilight thought. Only a few moments remained, and Fluttershy was clearly behind. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation of the buzzer. A quiet rattle, nevertheless shockingly loud in the silence, filled the stage. One of Sparrow's ribs, leaning at a precarious angle, finally separated from his spine. The dry sinews split, and the slender bone toppled off of the stretcher and onto the floor with a clatter. The judges mumbled to each other. Less than a minute later, the clock hit 0, and the crowd erupted with quiet whispers. Twilight and Rarity let out a breath they didn't realize they were holding.
This is going to be close, Chip. Sparrow was ahead the entire round, but it seems the dry air just wasn't on his side. True, Ace. The judges will have to decide whether or not to hold that against him. It looks like they're ready.
The head judge passed the announcers 3 cards, which they spent a moment reviewing.
We have the decision, Chip. Would you do the honors? I'd be glad to. Fellas and gentlecolts, your winner by split decision is Fluttershy!
The crowd cheered politely, and thousands of ponies were nearly as loud as an ocean surf on a gentle day.
And good for her. That was probably the toughest round I've seen in 10 years of announcing for this contest. It sure was, Ace. It's sad to see Shy Sparrow's exit in the tournament, so close to the finals. But at least his family gets to bury him now. Silver lining, Chip. There's always a silver lining.
So, are you ready?
Twilight Sparkle asked. Fluttershy let out a quiet breath. She and Twilight were alone in the anteroom. Rarity was holding their seats in the VIP section.
I think so,
She said.
This will be the hardest round, though.
Come on, Fluttershy. You just beat a skeleton at being quiet. How hard could this opponent be?
It's complicated.
Fluttershy said. She let out another breath and turned to watch the door, waiting for her opponent to arrive. He didn't keep them for long. Under a minute later, the door swung open. A diminutive form strode into the room, followed by the judges. Twilight stared at the other finalist in shock.
No,
She whispered.
Yes.
Fluttershy said. She smiled at her opponent.
Congratulations, Angel Bunny.
The White Rabbit looked at the two with disdain and turned away. As always, he said nothing.
There you are.
Rarity said.
I was beginning to wonder if you... are you all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost.
Twilight Sparkle settled into the seat beside her friend. Her eyes were still wide with shock.
it's complicated,
She finally mumbled. Rarity was about to press for more details, but the announcers interrupted.
Well, this is it, Chip. This is the final round of the Quiet Game World Championships. Ace, if this crowd was any louder, I wouldn't be able to hear myself think.
Twilight looked around the stadium. No less than 10,000 ponies crowded into the stands. Together they were almost as loud as the streets near her library in Ponyville.
There's a fascinating story between our two finalists. Everyone knows Fluttershy, of course, our returning champion, but not many know her opponent, a dark horse, who cut a literal swath through the competition this year. I'll tell you, Ace, watching him was frightening and delightful. I hope I never see him in the ring with me. You're a little too old for that, Chip. This is a young pony sport. Back to our challenger. I can barely believe it. But not just a friend of Fluttershy's. He's one of her roommates.
friend.
Twilight thought. They were using some expansive definitions of the word.
Presenting our challenger, Angel Bunny.
The White Rabbit hopped onto the stage. He stared angrily at the crowd and settled onto his haunches, waiting.
And of course, our returning champion, Fluttershy.
The Pegasus didn't walk onto the stage. Instead, she flew, landing delicately on the wood platform to the cheers of the crowd. She removed a small crown from her mane and gave it to the head judge.
Do you think they'll resize that crown for Angel Bunny if he wins, Chip? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Ace. Those two have to make it through a free-for-all round, and I'm not so sure a little bunny like that stands a chance against a Pegasus. That's a good point. For you ponies at home, this round our contestants may do whatever they like to each other. Nothing is off limits as long as they're quiet.
Oh, dear.
Rarity whispered. Even from their seats, they could see the evil gleam in Angel Bunny's eyes.
Enough talk, Ace. The judges have signaled they're ready to begin.
On the stage, the judge spoke briefly to each contestant, then retreated to her desk with the other judges. Fluttershy and Angel Bunny stared at each other for a long moment, neither moving. The rabbit struck first. He pulled a carrot from somewhere. Twilight later swore he used magic, and flung it with all his might at Fluttershy's head. The vegetable struck her square between the eyes. She winced and gave him a hurt look. He snorted silently, avoiding her grasping hooves. He darted around her and jumped onto her back. He used her wings to climb up to her mane and yanked on it with both paws with all of his might. Fluttershy grimaced as her head was pulled back. She tried to bat him away with her hooves, but couldn't reach past her shoulders. Finally, she resorted to her wings and managed to knock him away with a lucky flap. He bounced on the stage and tumbled to a stop, not moving. Fluttershy gasped silently in concern and dove to check on him, only to receive a rabbit foot in the snout. She stumbled away, her face scrunched up in pain, as he came to his feet. They stared at each other, the Pegasus and the bunny. Both gulped for breath, their coats and manes disheveled. Neither moved. Fluttershy broke first. She reared up full height and stared down on him with all of her might. The force of her gaze froze the bunny in place. His tiny black eyes widened in fear. The stare, while effective at corralling foals and animals, was less useful as a weapon in the quiet game. For several long minutes, she held the rabbit in thrall, but to no advantage. He remained silent even as he trembled. Eventually, her gaze faltered and she blinked. Angel Bunny shook himself. He quickly recovered from the stare and glared back at her with his usual disdain. He took a bounding leap and landed on her snout. Fluttershy flailed at him with her hooves, but couldn't hit him too hard for fear of injuring one of them. Meanwhile, he battered at her with his tiny paws, scratched at her nostrils, pried at her eyelids, and made a good general nuisance of himself.
"This doesn't look good for Fluttershy, folks,"
Chip said.
"Angel Bunny is having his way with her."
Twilight had to agree. Angel Bunny was controlling the action. It was only a matter of time before he forced her to squeal. Suddenly, Fluttershy stopped trying to smack him with her hooves. Instead, she lay down, placed her face next to the floor, and gently began petting the rabbit with one hoof.
What is she doing?
Rarity whispered. Twilight shook her head in confusion. Angel Bunny twitched. His frantic attack slowed as she continued her gentle strokes. He reluctantly dropped off her face and curled onto the ground before her. Her hoof continued its slow petting motions. For a minute, Twilight couldn't figure out what her plan was. Angel Bunny was quieter than ever now. The time was running out. If she didn't make a move soon, he was going to win. She was beginning to panic for her friend when a quiet thumping sound intruded the silence of the auditorium. 10,000 ponies sat on the edge of their seats. On stage, Angel Bunny's foot rhythmically beat on the floorboards, completely beyond his control. Fluttershy continued petting with a smile.
"That's it! That's the buzzer!"
Chip cried.
"Fluttershy has won!"
Twilight? That was an interesting trip, wasn't it?
Rarity asked. She and Twilight Sparkle sat in the Ponyville spa bath again, soaking in the heat. Fluttershy was still doing a final round of interviews in Canterlot.
It was. Much more than I expected. I mean, the quiet game? Really?
There was a long pause.
Do you think we should tell the others about it?
Rarity asked. Twilight considered it silently. It wasn't a hard decision to reach.
Let's keep this one to ourselves, Rarity.
I'm glad you think so.
The two enjoyed the blessed quiet.